ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਰੇਡੀਓ USA ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਟੀਵੀ USA ਸੁਣ ਰਹੇ ਦੇਖ ਰਹੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਹੀ ਸਰੋਤਿਆਂ ਤੇ ਦਰਸ਼ਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਜੀ ਆਇਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਆਖਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਸਭ ਨੂੰ ਪਿਆਰ ਭਰੀ ਸਤਿ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ। ਅਪਡੇਟ ਫਾਰਮਿੰਗ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮੈਂ ਰਾਜਕਨਵੀਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਅੱਜ ਮੇਰੇ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰਨ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਫਰੈਜ਼ਨੋ ਇਰੀਗੇਸ਼ਨ ਡਿਸਟ੍ਰਿਕਟ ਤੋਂ ਕੇਸੀ ਚੌਹਾਨ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਉਹ ਜੁੜਨਗੇ। ਸਿਗਮਾ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ ਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਵੈਲ ਰਜਿਸਟ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੀ ਚਰਚਾ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇਸ ਟਾਈਮ ਚੱਲ ਰਹੀ ਆ, ਕੀ ਡੈਡਲਾਈਨਸ ਨੇ, ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਆ, ਕਿਵੇਂ ਆ, ਉਹ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਬਾਤਾਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ। So with us, we have right now from Fresno Irrigation District, Kassy Chauhan. We'll be talking about Sigma, its implementation, which stage we are on with it, and about their well registration program. What are the deadlines? Where can we do that? Who has to do that? She'll be talking about all those things in today's show. Kassy, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Sasidika. Thank you for having me.
So by the last name, we know that you are a little bit Punjabi now. So it was good to hear Sat Sri Akal from you. So
yeah, that's right. Nice. That's right.
So we have you have a presentation for us, for our viewers today, for our listeners today. So tell us briefly what we will be discussing, what you will be, which topics you will be touching today.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on and share with your viewers an update in general about the North Kings GSA, the Kings Subbasin, where we're at in terms of implementing our groundwater sustainability plan, which is the document that shows how we're going to reach sustainability by 2040. And then I'm going to spend the last part of the show talking about our new well registration requirement for the North Kings GSA, and not only about the requirement, but how your viewers can get assistance with complying with the requirement, and some important deadlines to keep in mind as we work towards getting all of the wells within the North Kings GSA boundary registered.
Okay, that's awesome. So let's kick over talking points with Sigma. So every farmer now hopefully knows about Sigma. There was a huge thing. Not many people knew about Sigma few years ago. So Sustainable Ground Management Act. So we are in which year of Sigma right now?
We're starting year number 11. So Sigma's been around for well over 10 years. In fact, last year we celebrated the 10-year anniversary of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. And essentially, it is a little bit surprising that people don't know about Sigma, but I think you're right that more and more people are aware of it, and they're now becoming concerned about how it impacts them directly and what kind of changes they may need to be making on their individual farms because of Sigma and because of the requirement to reach sustainability. So we are just have submitted our 2025 update to our groundwater sustainability plan. That was the first 5-year update that was required by the Department of Water Resources for all groundwater sustainability agencies and basins. And so we essentially are telling the state on a report card that is known as a periodic evaluation how we're doing on that 5-year period. So our first plan was due in 2020. And we submitted that plan, and then our first 5-year periodic evaluation was due in 2025. So we submitted that earlier this year, and we are waiting for feedback from the state on, how they view the report card and the progress that we've made over this first 5-year period.
That's good. So if we don't have report cards, we'll never know where we are and what needs to be done, if we are good with it or needs to be more strict or lenient. Everybody wants to be lenient, so nobody wants to be strict. So should we go ahead and show the slides and go through the presentation?
Sure, let's get started.
Yeah.
Okay, so like I said, I'm going to just spend a little bit of time talking about a general update on where we're at with groundwater sustainability. I know that this was a very impactful regulation that was passed. And over the last 5 years, we've really been spending a lot of time not only developing the plan, but gathering more data that helps to make good groundwater management decisions. So next slide. So, the groundwater sustainability plan was passed in 2014, and that was in the middle of a real severe drought. The governor at the time said, we cannot continue to have chronic overdrafting of groundwater, which tends to happen, right? When there's a lot of surface water, people will use surface water. When there's no surface water, people turn to pumps, and it creates these conditions where we essentially have overdraft because we're taking more out than we're putting back into the ground. So in 2014, the governor passed and legislator passed the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. And it essentially says you have until 2040 to develop a plan on how you're going to create balance. So you have to have a plan that shows whatever you're taking out, you're able to put back in so that you can reach groundwater sustainability. And in the process, you have to avoid these undesirable results that are prescribed in the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. And every 5 years, as I mentioned, the Department of Water Resources requires an update on how we're doing. And they did that by design, as you said, it's good to have accountability. And they didn't want to wait until 2040 to figure out how people were doing. They wanted these 5-year updates that shows incrementally how you're addressing groundwater sustainability and taking the necessary actions to meet the sustainability goals that you've outlined in your groundwater sustainability plan.
Okay.
Next slide.
Sorry. Before we started the slide, you mentioned about that 5-year update about the report you have to send to Department of Water Resources. So where is your GSA standing on that? So you guys have sent what you have seen internally. So are you on par with this act? Are we behind? Are we still taking more groundwater, or are we okay?
Yeah, so the King Subbasin is doing very well in general. And the way that we are set up in the King Subbasin is we recognized we needed time. We needed time to reach sustainability, and that we were going to take every bit of the time allowed by the legislation to 2040 to reach sustainability. And so because of that, we adopted what's called a glide path approach to sustainability, meaning we are allowing our groundwater levels to decline over time until they reach, they stabilize, and then they essentially fluctuate somewhat, but not continually downward. And the reason we did that is because it allows us time to do projects. And so a big part of the King Subbasin's approach to sustainability, because we have really good surface water rights through the various irrigation districts, including Fresno Irrigation District, and we have infrastructure, is to do a lot of groundwater recharge projects. And so we can do a lot of projects between 2020 and 2040, which will help to, in those really wet years, put a lot of water into the underground. And so in general, we're doing well. FID has more than 1,100 acres of groundwater basins. And when we have those wet years, we're able to put a lot of water into those basins and get it into the underground, which then accounts for when we have dry periods and we have to pump out and use our groundwater wells to meet the crop demands. And so based on that 5-year report, we're doing well. We met our 10% of the overdraft mitigation is what we were aiming to do in the first 5-year period. And we met that requirement based on the 2025 update that we just submitted to Department of Water Resources.
So when you say that this is how the depleted is groundwater, so how do you guys how do you do it across the basin? There are multiple GSAs in there, so it becomes, I know it becomes very complicated how to decide at what level the water table should be. So what's the lowest you guys can go, and where we are right now with that water table?
Yeah, so it's hard to answer that question because the hydrology and the subsurface conditions vary across the entire King Subbasin, which covers almost 1 million acres.
Hmm.
And so what happens is we have representative monitoring wells that are located throughout the King Subbasin. And
Okay.
in North Kings GSA, we have 32 monitoring wells. Each one of those monitoring wells has what we call a hydrograph, which essentially looks at historical groundwater data
Mm-hmm.
and how the groundwater level data has trended over the past sometimes 100 years, and
Mm-hmm.
it's generally downward. And then we essentially look at what happened, how much decline happened in that last very dry period.
Mm-hmm.
And then we went 20% below that in terms of establishing our minimum level. So
Okay.
we go anywhere from about 150 feet depth to
Mm-hmm.
groundwater all the way down to about 200 feet depth to groundwater just in the North Kings GSA boundary. We do
Mm-hmm.
have some tools on our website if you're interested in terms of, what level is the groundwater going to stabilize in my particular area where my farm is. You can
Mm-hmm.
go to our website, northkingsgsa.org, and you type in your address and it will tell you what the minimum level is for that section of land based on the closest monitoring well in your area.
That's awesome. That's good. That's good to know. So northkingsgsa.org. That's where
That's
you
right.
can get that information. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So obviously, Sigma, it's a big thing. Millions of acres under it. So there are different agency roles. So if you can briefly explain who is doing what.
Yeah, that's a really good segue. So I've mentioned the California Department of Water Resources. The Sustainable Groundwater Management Act identifies the California Department of Water Resources, or DWR, as the agency that regulates and assists the local GSAs in reaching groundwater sustainability. So they're the primary agency. They did the initial evaluation of all the groundwater sustainability plans to determine whether or not they meet the intent of the law and whether or not the plan will result in sustainable conditions within that basin. And it's important to note, and you mentioned there are lots of GSAs and lots of basins. The King Subbasin has 7 groundwater sustainability agencies within it. And
Hmm.
so every single one of those GSAs has a groundwater sustainability plan. And then there's a coordination agreement that shows how all of those plans are coordinated. That all gets submitted to Department of Water Resources. They make an evaluation on whether that plan is adequate. And if it's adequate, they continue overseeing that basin, and they will allow that basin to continue implementing through what's called an approved groundwater sustainability plan. And I
Okay.
am happy to report that the King Subbasin has an approved groundwater sustainability plan from Department of Water Resources. And so we're continuing to implement. We did address their corrective actions and did some additional analysis and studies. That updated plan was submitted in 2025, and we're continuing through with implementing that groundwater sustainability plan. If the Department of Water Resources decides the plan is inadequate,
Mm-hmm.
then they get referred over to another state agency, which is the State Water Resources Control Board, for potential probation. And essentially, probation is a status of a GSA that allows the State Water Board to assist the groundwater sustainability agencies and the basins
Mm-hmm.
to get back on track to reach sustainability. So it's really intended to be a backstop for um, basins and agencies that may need assistance getting a plan in place that will result in sustainable conditions. So we do have several basins in the local area that have been recommended for probation because of an inadequate groundwater sustainability plan, but that is not our the Kings Subbasin is fortunate to have a plan that has been approved by Department of Water Resources. And then it's up to the individual GSAs and the basins to implement and make sure that we're doing the necessary things to reach sustainability.
So, does all the 7 GSAs under King Subbasin have a coordinated one, or each one has an individual one?
Each one has their own groundwater sustainability plan, but they all use common methodology, and all of
Mhm.
that is prescribed in the coordination agreement that also gets submitted to the state that shows, yes, we all have individual plans, but the methodology is the same, and we coordinate every single month. The King Subbasin GSA managers meets so that we can
Mhm.
stay coordinated. And so there's common threads through all of the GSPs, regardless of which GSA you're in.
Okay. So if we go to the next slide, so it explains like why Sigma was implemented. If you can briefly tell us, I know you already told about it a little bit. So if you can explain more about it.
Yeah, as I mentioned, it was implemented during the last real significant drought between 2012 and 2016. Sigma was implemented in 2014, and it was really in the face of, really severe conditions that were happening throughout the state, including domestic wells going dry, public water system wells going dry, lots of impacts, agricultural wells going dry.
Mhm.
The other thing that was a big issue was land subsidence. So essentially the sinking of the land causing damage to state infrastructure and other infrastructure. And then there
Mhm.
were also water quality concerns. The water quality was degrading because the water was coming from a much lower depth. And so all of those things were drawing attention to the fact that something had to be done to reverse this trend of continuing to overdraft and pump more than we were putting back in. Now, what's interesting is we all know the groundwater aquifer is very dynamic and it is going to fluctuate, right? And so, because of that, what the King Subbasin has done, I mentioned our glide path approach. Essentially, what we've done is we've allowed the groundwater levels to decline, as I mentioned, and then it will stabilize. But we know it's not just going to stay at this, very static level. It's going to
Mhm.
fluctuate, and we account for that because we know there's going to be future drought periods. And so
Exactly.
essentially, we say we know it's going to drop in those really dry years, but we don't want it to drop so low that we can't get it to recover. And so we've put a lot of effort into establishing what that operational bandwidth is, which is essentially the difference between our minimum thresholds and our measurable objectives. And as long as we stay within that operational band, then we believe that we will be able to meet our sustainability goals.
Hmm. Uh, so there's always this questions from the growers, especially like under Sigma, they are the one who have to do all the things. As you are mentioning that state sees that their infrastructure gets bad because of land subsidence and other stuff. The water quality itself is bad as we go deeper.
Mhm.
There's less groundwater. So what has state done from their point of view under Sigma? Everything is the farmer's main point of view about Sigma is that they have to do everything. What is state doing on their part?
Yeah, so the state is, I think there's a few things the state has attempted to do to assist in the implementation of Sigma. Some of it was handled through the governor's executive orders that were issued in 2013. 2023. They've essentially tried to put some restrictions on drilling of new wells. So
Hmm.
not necessarily addressing the current conditions, but essentially stopping the bleeding. Let's not continue to add to the problem. And so now the GSAs have to review and essentially provide approval for any new wells that are going in our GSA boundaries. So that was the state's attempt at limiting new extraction facilities and exasperating the problem.
Hmm.
They've also are developing tools in how to address land subsidence. There's a lot of documentation coming out on land subsidence. The biggest thing they did was afford the groundwater sustainability agencies time to implement projects and programs. And the state does provide a lot of financial assistance for things like new recharge projects. And Fresno Irrigation District has been very appreciative of the state resources that have been available through Proposition 1 and now soon Proposition 4 for things like new recharge basin projects. And I think that's really the state's way of helping and coming alongside the GSAs to help with the success of Sustainable Groundwater Management Act.
How many facilities like those are in your GSA in King's Subbasin? Like, how many acres is under that groundwater recharge projects?
Yeah, the number's constantly changing, but in Fresno Irrigation District alone, we have almost 1,100 acres of recharge basins. That means dedicated basins that are strictly used for recharge. So when we have those really, really wet years, we put a lot of water into those basins and it essentially percolates into the underground. That is a huge benefit. And in 2023 alone, in the King Subbasin, we were able to recharge about 500,000 acre feet of water. That's a significant amount of water, equivalent to what we can store in Millerton Lake. We were able to store in the underground. So those types of projects and having financial assistance from the state to be able to do those types of projects is very, very beneficial. And the fact that we have until 2040 to continue building those projects is really, really helpful. And otherwise, we would have had to have stopped the pumping, essentially, because that's the only other way to address it.
Yeah, and if we stop pumping, there will be no ag land left.
That's right.
So that
would have been detrimental to the valley as a whole, for sure.
Yeah, just not ag. So the whole economy is revolving around it. So
that's right.
It's gonna be tough for that. When you're talking about sustainability, as the next slide you have made for everybody, if you can talk about that as well.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we have these sustainability goals, which is essentially how we have defined where for the North Kings GSA, how we're going to be in balance. So we're not going to be in this chronic overdraft condition. And in the process, SGMA requires that we avoid these undesirable results. And they're identified as declining groundwater levels. All of our groundwater levels to date, despite the amount of recharge that we've done, the groundwater levels to continue to decline at the rate of about 1 foot per year. And what I can tell you, which is very concerning, is the rate of decline is much faster than the rate of recovery. So we pull water out much faster than it's able to recover, and we've got to address that. We also have to address reduction in groundwater storage in the underground. The aquifer is very bountiful. We have a lot of water beneath the ground available, but we've got to make sure we're replenishing so that we don't get to the point where we're depleting the aquifer. There's also things like groundwater quality, which we've talked about a little bit. As you go deeper, you run into different constituents, and that can affect the water quality. And then there's requirements to address land subsidence, interconnected surface waters, and that is a very complex evaluation that has to be done that essentially shows groundwater pumping is not adversely affecting the flow in the rivers. And the North Kings GSA is sandwiched between the San Joaquin River and the Kings River. We have to make sure that whatever groundwater pumping is occurring is not pulling water out of the rivers, and that's addressed in the interconnected streams undesirable result. And then seawater intrusion is the other one, which we don't have to address here in the valley so much, but it does impact a lot of the coastal GSAs.
Coastal GSAs, yeah. So multiple things. So when you are making a plan, so what are the things you have to, I think you've been mentioning, we've been talking about all those things in between. So according to your slide, what else do you want to add to it?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, and you mentioned it, there's so much burden that is put on the individual farmers. And so a huge part of all the things that we do specifically in the North Kings GSA is making sure that we have good engagement with our stakeholders. We do not
Mhm.
want this just to be, here's a mandate, go figure it out and make the changes that are needed. We really
Mhm.
try to come alongside, make sure that we're providing resources available to growers. With Fresno Irrigation District specifically, we've had a lot of success working with the NRCS and getting funds available for farmers that want to make changes on their individual farms. For the North Kings GSA, as it relates to well registration, which I'll talk about in a moment, we have resources available. We always try to make sure that we make that information available in multiple languages, including Punjabi. So we have all of our resources translated into Punjabi on our website. So it's just really, really important that our stakeholders have the assistance needed, because it is a big burden and it is
It
a
is.
lot of change that's required. And we're only successful if we can come alongside our growers and our stakeholders and implement all together as a GSA.
Hmm. Uh, in the next slide, you basically shown overdrafted, critically overdrafted basins. Some of their GSPs are approved. Some of them are inadequate. Some of them are going in probation. There are big things happening regarding that. If you want to touch on those things.
Yeah, and I've talked a little bit about it. I think the main point is that the King Subbasin has an approved groundwater sustainability plan. And every other GSA that I have listed there, like the Chowchilla Subbasin was recommended for probation and they
Mm-hmm.
are now returned to DWR. The Tule and the Tulare Lake subbasins are in probation. There are some legal challenges that are happening, but it's very, I feel like we're in a very good place
Mm-hmm.
having an approved basin and or having an approved groundwater sustainability plan, where we
Mm-hmm.
can really just focus our attention on implementing the plan, doing the projects, and making the necessary changes, rather than having to go through a probationary process. And probation, the state's approach, the State Water Resources Control Board's approach with probation is you come in, you register your wells with the state, and you start paying a fee right away to the state. And you also have to report your extractions. So there's some immediate actions that happen once you're put in probation. And we feel fortunate that in the King Subbasin, we're not subject to that, and each individual GSA can make the decisions and implement the management actions that are needed for their GSA versus this, statewide approach. And we feel very um, uh,
Lucky.
fortunate that we have the local control still. And Sigma was really founded on local control, and we're
Mm-hmm.
doing everything we can to maintain that local control and essentially figure it out ourselves along with our stakeholders versus having the state tell us how we're going to do it.
So the state itself is uh, doing it like a big brother, right?
That's essentially that's the approach, and it's a one size fits all type approach that the state uses when
Mm-hmm.
they implement and require GSAs and basins to be in probation.
So these GSPs which are inadequate, where they are in probation, some of them are having hearings in next months. So the growers over there, they feel attacked that this has come suddenly on them.
Mhm.
So I know you mentioned your subbasins, your plan. Luckily, fortunately, your growers doesn't have to go through that. But what happened to those growers? Do they have to put their land? They have to fallow their land. They have to come out of the business. Like it's a really tough situation for them. Like, is there anything you want to tell them, or what do you think the approach could be?
Yeah, I think it's you're exactly right. There's essentially two ways to address overdraft, right? It's either you put more water in the underground, and that's either through existing surface water supplies or new surface water supplies, or you stop pumping. So the reality is there are some projections that show that as much as 1 million acres will have to be fallowed across the 8 San Joaquin Valley counties.
Mm.
That's, as you mentioned earlier, that is detrimental not only to agriculture, but to the local economies across the board, because so much of the economy is founded on agricultural businesses. And so that would be extremely detrimental. Also from food security perspective, because we have fertile ground and we produce a lot of food for the nation and the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the approach is to do as much as you possibly can and minimize the amount of land that has to come out of production. And when it does come out of production, that you are repurposing it so that it's something that can still provide, resources for the local economy and for the local region. So you're trying to minimize the impacts from any land that has to come out of production.
So Casey, that's a really tough situation, because there will be lands over there which has to become fallow, where there have been generations have been doing farming. They don't know anything other than farming. Is there a state has a plan for those kind of farmers or people who has to fallow their land? What do they have for the future? Like, you just can't switch on and off like that. So that's tough and hard place for those guys over there. So what kind of plan? You talked about resources being provided by the state. So is state also thinking about that?
They are thinking about that. There's a program through the Department of Conservation that it's essentially designed to look at multi-benefit land repurposing. So
Hmm.
how can we, recognizing that some land has to come out of production, and some land, honestly, regulation of farming in California is just really difficult in general. And
Hmm.
then you add on Sustainable Groundwater Management Act and the requirements to um, create this balanced aquifer and eliminate overdraft. It's difficult. So some land is coming out of production, not because it's forced fallowing, but people are just recognizing that it's just too much. They can't continue to stay above ground. And so the state is essentially has this program that is looking at lands that have to come out of production. How can we repurpose that land for multiple benefits? And it includes things like how do we assist the growers in that transition? How do
Hmm.
we create new jobs associated with that, whatever the new purpose is going to be? How do we enhance the environment with that particular land? So there's all of these things that you can consider as part of that multi-benefit land repurposing, so that you're not just taking the land out of production and the field sits idle, which is then another nuance. There's dust concerns and other types of concerns associated with land, even rodents and pests. That happens when you just abandon land. So they're trying
Hmm.
to be responsible in making sure that that doesn't happen, and we're trading one problem for another problem.
Another one. Yeah. So
And
right
there's a lot of
now.
information on the
Mhm.
website, Department of Conservation website, about those programs.
Okay.
I think the other thing that is something that I really feel passionate about is, having individual farmers, even though you may think, how can what I'm doing on my farm really make a difference?
Hmm.
And I've really tried to, when I talk to farmers, talk about, if you make this change and your neighbor makes this change and your neighbor's neighbor makes that change, like collectively we can start to have a lot of impact. And it's things like using soil moisture sensors, right? Like, let's be responsible with how we irrigate. And
Hmm.
in that line, let's maintain irrigation flexibility. So as a farmer, when you're making a decision, like years ago, it was all about converting to drip irrigation, right?
Hmm.
Well, now we say, if you're converting to drip, keep your flood lines, because like in 2023, we can really exponentially increase the amount of recharge we can do if we have farmers flood irrigating, because we have so much water available, right? And so it's things like that, those little changes that give you flexibility in how you do things on your individual farm, which collectively can have a big impact. And the biggest impact we can have in the King Subbasin is when farmers can keep their wells off. That's the biggest benefit we can have in terms of aquifer recovery, is farmers keeping their wells off. So when FID has a very long irrigation season, we see a lot of recovery happening because the wells are off, and a lot of water is not only being applied to the crops, but it's going into the aquifer. So those types of things I think are really important for farmers to think about. And even if it's a 20 acres and you're making that change on 20 acres of land, collectively, because we have so many 20-acre parcels, collectively it can have a big impact.
So as you were mentioning, so without water, but as you say, keeping the wells off, obviously not in drought years, you can't usually do that. How long was irrigation season this year for FID?
Yeah, FID ran this year from April 1st until July 31st. So it was a 4-month irrigation run. We had about an 80% of average water year. And so we just did not have enough water to run that 5th month. I know there were lots of discussions about running water in August, and because of we have limited storage, right, in Pine Flat Reservoir, we did not have enough water supply to make a run in August.
I think last year it was pretty long.
Last year it was March through, no, we started
August?
April through August. So we had a
Yeah,
5-month run
5
last
months.
year, but we
Yeah.
also had 100% of average water year.
Yeah.
And so it's, yeah. We would've
One of the canals goes nearby my house, so I always see that. Now it is empty. The last few months it was running pretty full.
Yep,
So
that's
yeah,
right. Yeah.
that's right. Yeah. So now when you're mentioning about wells being off, as you mentioned earlier during the show, well registration. If you can talk about that right now, what's going on with that? Your GSP requires to do well registration now. How it is going to be done? Who has to do it? Is anybody exempt, or everybody has to do it?
Yeah. Why don't we skip forward? I have some information that is on slide 15. And then I'm happy to talk about that. Go ahead and skip through. I've already kind of covered most of this.
Got it.
There we go. So I mentioned that every groundwater sustainability agency has autonomy in how we are reaching sustainability. And so in our groundwater sustainability plan, we have what's called management actions identified in every single groundwater sustainability plan. So for the North Kings GSA, we have well registration identified as a management action. And we started a voluntary registration program in March of 2024. Well, I don't know what your experience is with anything that's voluntary, but we didn't get a lot of participation, right?
How much? Do you have any numbers for me?
We had about 100 wells of what we're estimating is probably between 5,000 and 6,000 wells out there. 100 people registered their wells.
Yeah.
And so that's not very good
That's
success.
not much. Yeah.
And so because of how important this data is to the GSA to be able to make good management decisions, our board in April adopted a policy that essentially requires well registration for all wells within the North Kings GSA boundary. The policy establishes a November 30th deadline for all wells to be registered. And you can see on the screen, there's a QR code there that will take you to the website. And then I also have the website listed there. And then the flyer that you see on the right has just some general information on the well requirements. And as I mentioned, all of this information is available on the North Kings website at www.northkings.org. And it has all of the documents are available and translated into Punjabi if that's the preferred method of viewing those.
Yeah.
And so go ahead.
Go ahead.
We can go to the next slide. One of the things that we are wanting to do is make sure that we're providing assistance for anyone that may be having trouble registering. So we have a well registration workshop that is scheduled for August 27th in Kerman. It's from 3 to 6 p.m. at the Kerman Community Center. And we're planning on not only giving some information on why we are requiring well registration, because nobody likes Big Brother, right? You mentioned Big Brother earlier. Nobody likes to have to do more things. But the North Kings GSA wants to make sure that we have the tools in place to keep that local control and make good management decisions. And it's very difficult to manage what you don't know about and what you don't know is out there. And so we're asking everyone to register their wells. And at this workshop, not only can you learn more about well registration in general, but we will have assistance available. If you bring your information, you can get your well registered and satisfy the requirement at that workshop. And
so it is only registration, no flow meters, no nothing.
There's no flow meter required at this point. It is just registration. So we have a good accounting of what's out there and how many wells are out within the GSA boundary. And if you go to the next slide, we can talk about, well registration may sound very difficult. We've tried to make it as simple as possible, and essentially limited information is needed to satisfy the requirement. And if you go onto the website, you essentially have to know the coordinates for where your well is located. And you can type in the address on the website and identify the location on the parcel where the well is located, and it will give me the coordinates. And then how you refer to the well, is it the ag well, the corner, the well on the corner, however you reference that well, the coordinates for the well. And then if you have other information, like when the well was drilled, how deep it is, you can put that information in. And that is it in terms of satisfying the requirement for well registration.
So is this only for ag land, or you have to do domestic wells as well?
It is for ag and domestic wells, all wells within the GSA boundary. And I'll tell you why. We have a lot of domestic wells in the North Kings GSA boundary. And collectively, they have a big impact. And one of the things that we're responsible for is mitigating for any domestic wells that go dry between now and 2040. So the North Kings GSA has a program, and we need wells registered so we know what kind of an impact that program is going to have. And in order to take advantage of that domestic well mitigation program, the wells have to be registered. So I'm encouraging, and the policy requires all domestic wells to also be registered, and it will allow you to possibly take advantage of this domestic well mitigation program, which provides financial resources if the domestic well happens to go dry between now and 2040.
Okay, so anybody who has basically a well who is pumping water out of the ground, so in your GSA, North Kings GSA, if you are within the boundary, you have to register. And you said the deadline is November 30th.
November 30th. That's correct.
November. What happens if somebody doesn't register? Do they get a fine or what?
Yeah, so the policy does have what's called a late registration fee. And so right now it's free to register. You go onto the website, you put your information in, and then you get a confirmation that essentially says you've satisfied the requirement and your well is registered. If you do not do that, starting after November 30th, our board will have discretion to charge a late registration fee, which right now is set at $100 per wellhead.
Okay.
So that will be the penalty that our board will implement if for anyone that doesn't register their wells or registers after November 30th.
So you are assuming there are around 5,000 to 6,000 wells in the GSA?
That's correct. And we don't know for sure. We've done our best estimates. We're estimating there's probably between 5,000 and 6,000 wells. current number of wells registered is sitting right at about 550. So we've made some good progress from 100 onto the voluntary program to more than 550 with the mandatory program. And like I said, we're really trying to spread the word, make sure people are aware of their requirement, and provide assistance for satisfying the requirement. And we're really appreciative. If you want to go to the next slide, really appreciative of Punjabi American Grower Group, and we have a growers corner that will be coming out featuring Arshdeep that essentially talks about how simple getting your well registered is and some of the reasons why it's important for the GSA and for the grower to have their wells registered. So I really appreciate the support and of course the opportunity to be on your show today to talk more about that.
No worries, Kassy. So you have to do basically well registration. Is this only for North Kings GSA or other GSAs are also doing it? Because our program goes to all across California. So do you have any idea? Do you have any information about other GSAs who is also doing well registration?
Yeah, so that's a really good point. And as we've already talked about, there are a lot of GSAs. I would encourage your growers to make sure that they go to their individual GSA website. And on our website, if you type in your address, we have a tool on there that will tell you what GSA that particular parcel is in to understand what the requirements are for that GSA. In the Kings Subbasin, I know the McMullen area GSA has a registration program. The North Fork Kings GSA has a registration program, and now the North Kings GSA has a registration program. So 3 of the 7 have a well registration program so far in the Kings Subbasin, and many other GSAs across the state already have implemented well registration programs.
Somebody who doesn't know if they are under which GSA, is there a website? Is there a place where they can go to check I come under which GSA?
There are. So if you go to the main northkingsgsa.org website, ORG website, on the bottom, there is a tool that's called Find My GSA. And you type in your address and it will tell you which GSA you're a part of. And you can find your GSA that way.
Okay. And you were mentioning before there is one event in Kerman. Is your GSA planning more events like those for well registration, or is this the only one before November?
No, we will definitely be having more events. This is the one that we have scheduled already. We'll probably have another one in September and then another one in October. So over the course of the next few months leading up to November 30th, we will have events. We also have a full support team that's available either by call or by, we can even do a video call to assist. And so I would just encourage anyone that's needing assistance to reach out. We're also trying to work with Punjabi American Grower Group to be part of their event that's going to be held later this fall. And have a well registration table set up at that event and similar events. Similarly, with the UC Cooperative Extension, we're doing events with them and trying to make sure that anytime there's a group of growers that are assembled, that we're there to be able to provide assistance.
So right now, people who are watching the presentation, I'm showing you the website, how the front page looks like, where you can create your account. If you have already created, you can log in, and this is the tool where you can check if your GSA map service you come under what thing. So is there a phone number? Is there an email where growers can contact so they can get help, as you mentioned, there's service available?
Yes, the phone number is 559-693-5119. And then the email is wells@northkingsgsa.org. That's the email address you can email, or you can certainly reach out to me directly. We have a full support team, as I mentioned, that are available to answer calls. You can even text. We're just trying to reach people and have people reach us in any means possible that works best for them.
Can you repeat that other number you mentioned before?
Yes, it's 559-693-5119. And the
Okay.
general email address is wells@northkingsgsa.org.
All right. So thank you, Kassy, very much for your time today. So talking about Sigma, talking about well registration under North Kings GSA plan GSP. So thank you very much for this information. Hopefully we get more people registered so these plans can go ahead, because right now everybody wants to be under FID because you get good water over there. There's good underground water and good surface water over there. So thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing this information.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Sat Sri Akal.
That's the